Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, special host Meredith Zonsius speaks with managing partner Craig Jeffery of Strategic Treasurer on staying radically focused with a cadence and structure around planning and accomplishment. They explore leading practices for long-term planning, understanding cycles, disciplined methodologies for development and growth, having an intentional mindset to successfully manage projects during a crisis, and more. Listen in to find out how to help move yourself and your organization to the next level of accomplishment and focus. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thanks, Meredith.
What is the reason for including a discussion about planning cadence as a part of the Go Strategic podcast series?
Yeah, when we think about planning, sometimes we think about that as being strategic. Other times we're like, that's just the blocking and tackling of the business for projects. But why is this included in the Go Strategic series? The reason I wanted to include it was that some Treasury people who may be very knowledgeable, they're great at managing in a crisis as the crisis focuses the mind and the activities. But they may not be as disciplined at getting things done during times of stasis or equilibrium when they should be advancing projects. Many things can get in the way. Others, we find, are great at explaining why they can't get their main goals accomplished because there's so many activities that occupy their time and their mind. And this is a challenge for both of those, that organizations have to advance. Treasury has to address crises or periods of disruption with focus, and they have to get things done during periods of regular time. And what we find is that there's not nearly as many Treasury professionals who are diligent at all times in a way that allows them to make a radical difference in their companies over time. Systematically, over the year, over multiple years. They're very good. Some are very good at, a very focused project, but getting multiple things done over time, that's a lot rarer. I guess the concept is that we think a podcast or a discussion on this topic makes sense because those who discipline themselves are intentional in the discipline, the planning, the sticking to the plan, making sure they're holding themselves and others accountable, lends itself to a successful project management type organization that gets things done, and they're much more successful and they help their organizations more. And that's really part of being strategic, is making sure you're accomplishing the organization's objectives and strategies over time.
What would you say is some of the factors that would hinder a person from making a radical difference?
There's a couple different jobs and tasks that you see. There might be a strategic job where you're doing planning, an FP&A job. The treasurer might be doing a significant amount of strategic work as well as relationship work. Others may have a tremendous amount of day-to-day activities with deadlines, get these FX trades done, set the cash position, manage the risks, or do sorts of reporting or activity, whether it's operational or otherwise. Those people that have a lot of activities that are deadline sensitive tend to be very good at those and can work very quickly, but they don't always transition well to the strategic items. They're great at the urgent items, and they can work quickly on those. But if something doesn't have to be done today, it can be put off till tomorrow, it might be put off till the day after tomorrow and the day after that. And it's not the procrastinator's dilemma, Meredith, that phrase is don't put off till tomorrow, what you can put off till the day after tomorrow. It's this doesn't have to be done today. I'm working on fires and really urgent items, and that fills my day, and I don't get to the longer tasks that I have to really pay attention to over a long time domain.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I'd like you to cover the first section of our episode titled Planning Cadence. Tell me about planning and this planning cadence.
Sure. So I use the term planning cadence and planning structure. The cadence is what's the frequency of the different activities in the planning cycle. What planning needs to occur? How does that fit with the overall organization? So, we think about strategic planning. We think about the planning cadence. What are you doing that helps with the organization's strategies, their tactics? What are the things you do that help the operation work better over time so you can continue to add value? So the planning cadence is, focuses on what do I need to do intentionally to get things done? What has to occur at different cycles or timeframes? So when we think about planning cadence, there's almost always an annual planning cycle where you're saying, what do I want to accomplish over this 1 year time domain? And that's not done in isolation, but that's an area of significant focus to say, what do I want to cover over this year? We have multiple cycles in the year, we have multiple seasons, but we're making sure we're being intentional over that. And so there's an aspect of frequency and intentionality in that. And when I think about planning cadence, I think it might be easier to link it to what you hear about in IT. In IT, in a lot of organizations, you hear about Agile development, and then they have their own language of sprints and scrums and other terms. I mean, this Agile development means we're not just trying to boil the ocean, or we're not just trying to complete everything, big bang, we're going to wait a year and then we're going to develop or drop in a new banking structure, a new supply chain financing activity, or put in a FX risk management system. This is the concept of we're going to develop incremental improvements at a faster cycle, maybe on a 6-week cycle or a 3-month cycle. We're going to work and make sure we hold ourselves accountable quickly. And so when you hear about these sprints, it's like we have a 6-week sprint or a 4-week sprint. That is part of the planning cadence, where there's plans that stretch the year and there's plans for each cycle. Let's say it's a 6-week cycle. That really works well in IT areas, particularly where you see, development happening. You have to make sure you're developing your systems that way. Treasury has a lot of projects that have to be done that make sense in that type of time frame. So this is really the aspect of the long-term work that Treasury has to do, and making sure that they're accountable to themselves and progressing things systematically, as opposed to having all of their energies absorbed by the urgent of the day, the latest fire that has to be done, which easily absorbs all the time of a normal work week plus, X number of hours.
Excellent. Why do we need to have a planning cadence? Couldn't someone simply say, do your work?
Yeah, we can say that. You can say, do your work, and that really hasn't worked out very well. Putting some structure around that type of work matters, especially for the people that have to be involved in, let's say for half the day, they're working on urgent daily items that are time sensitive. You're trying to figure out your cash position, for example, or make your investment decisions. You want to get better rates with higher quality counterparties earlier in the day. That makes a difference for the organization. Time matters. You're going to be very focused, very, very focused, laser-like on that during that time period. And let's say your afternoon now isn't so deadline-oriented, urgent deadline-oriented. There has to be a different type of discipline for those activities. And not everyone is focused all day on urgent tasks every moment. Not everyone has a full day where they can work on their longer term projects. That's usually people are doing multiple activities like that. They've got a combination of two. And so, saying just do your work is good. You have to do it. But how can we help ourselves and help others do that more effectively? This type of having focus and having a planning cadence helps focus our attention on, we're 4 weeks away from the time frame I have to have all these major deliverables done. I'm behind. I'm on target. What do I need to do to make that work? How do I remove these obstacles? And you've seen that. You see that in IT areas where that's really helped on the development side, where they're they're taking smaller chunks and delivering them more rapidly. And so they're focused on that and that activity. And Treasury has so many projects and activities that having significant discipline in this area helps in very significant ways, particularly over time, where every project generates reduced risks, process efficiencies, better controls. Maybe few of them have to be delivered in a day or 2 days, but all of these add incremental value that continues. And so by being disciplined, you create this ongoing value-creating group that continues to make a significant difference and impact on their organization.
Do you recommend a particular frequency? Is there a best practice for planning cadence?
So in terms of a frequency or what's a best practice, is there a single best practice or a leading practice for planning and the accountability to that planning? We think what makes sense is that there's an annual planning process. This is how almost everybody thinks, at least on an annual basis. What are we going to do? How are we going to adapt what we've planned last year that may have taken longer than a year, or what's not done? What do I move forward or move back? So an annual planning process with a cycle that's either a 6-week cycle or a quarterly cycle. We found that to be one of the most effective cadences or timing methods that work for organizations. So company culture can dictate whether it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 13 weeks, like a quarter, but it's usually annual and one of those other two time domains for your cycle.
Let's expand on our discussion to include planning structure. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the planning structure is both, here's the cadence, and we do something on an annual basis and then across these cycles, but the structure is what do we do during those time frames or before those time frames to be delivered at the quarterly meeting or the every 6-week sprint or what have you. Annual is a planning where there's specific measurable activities and projects that are determined, agreed upon, and documented for the next year. The next cycle, which might be 6 weeks or 8 weeks, that will be spelled out in more detail about what's due. So this is there's some planning ahead of time to outline the major tasks for the year, the major projects, and then the subcomponents of that. That's written down. It's documented. The deliverables are specific. The resources are assigned to them. It should be both aggressive and reasonable. So it should be achievable if there's significant attention paid to it. So that's one part of that in terms of structure. What do we do for the annual planning meeting? There's work done ahead of time to lay out those targets, goals, making sure that there's, everyone provides input and there's commitment on the part of every player for those, but there's also specific accountability. And that sets up the other cycles to be run more efficient and effectively. So the review cycle, there's the work cycle where people are working all year to make sure that these are done. They're working throughout the cycle, whether it's 6 weeks or 13 weeks. And they have their deadlines. They have what they're supposed to accomplish. They're doing their other reporting on it as well, but they have all that information that they're supposed to accomplish. And they're going to present to the group, let's say the leadership of Treasury, or it could be all of Treasury. Here are the deliverables that I had. These are the projects and how it fit in. Here's the goals I had, what was met, what I missed, how I'm going to make up for that next cycle. And so these review cycles or meetings should be fast. They should establish that realistic aspect of accountability to each person, as well as some group responsibility where that makes sense. But there should be full visibility to the team or to the leadership team. Emphasis should be on successful delivery, not just getting things done, not rushing things done and passing them off to somebody else's to-do list, especially if it was on a critical path item. You pass it over to someone else and they need 4 weeks to do it, and you turned it over right before that scrum or that cycle ended. but that they're getting done on time, and that accountability is known, and it's measured, and there's a seriousness at a team level to get that done. So the structure has, the bigger planning and the specific accountability, rapid reporting, and this environment of we're accountable, I take responsibility, I get it done. I don't just spend time coming up with great excuses for all of those urgent things that prevented me from getting it done. There is no excuse for not getting the stuff done during those timeframes. You could see for a week or several days why you might not be able to work on it, but there is still direct accountability to get it done over these cycles.
So at the end of the day, how would you define success? Is that just getting it done?
I would say it has to be getting it done well, getting it done right, and getting it done on time. And getting it done on time consistently over the process, because that's going to require the type of discipline to communicate, to get others involved, and not to compromise and make a habit of those decisions where today you're like, well, I had these 4 fires in a row. I fought those fires all the time, and now it's 6:30, I need to go home, and I haven't done anything. Yeah, and that's how things can push forever, and you can make up good reasons for each of those. And part of that might be, I'm answering emails within 5 minutes of when I receive them all day. Maybe I need to, answer emails during this time of day, every half hour. Maybe at the end of the day, the last 4 hours of the day, I'll check them 2 times. And then once right before I go home. And the rest of the time, I'm working and I'm focusing on my projects, my deliverables, and communication for that. So I enforce discipline on myself to be focused or to put out fires quickly, depending on what is really necessary for the organization that day and over time.
Those are great examples. Any final thoughts?
I think that the biggest thing is, everybody's heard those phrases like, if you fail to plan on failing, measure twice, cut once, all those different types of things that help us think about making a plan and working your plan. It won't happen by itself. It has to happen with your own individual discipline. And as you can influence the rest of your group and team, the discipline that we have for each other to hold each other accountable to get those done. When I see those groups and teams that have an annual planning session, that's like everybody. But when they have a 6-week or a 13-week review and resetting of the plans for the next quarter or the next 6 weeks or the next cycle, and they're meeting, they're holding each other accountable, and they're not allowing excuses to shift when things are done, it's amazing what happens, not just in one quarter, but when you look over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, those types of organizations get vast quantities more of work done and improve their organization far better than those who just lightly plan and don't work to that plan with the type of discipline, with the type of planning cadence and accountability that we're talking about here.
That's excellent advice. Well, thank you very much, Craig, for sharing.
Sure, Meredith.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.